Hello, welcome everybody. Thank you all for being here this afternoon, this very warm afternoon. Hope everyone is staying cool today. And welcome to today's Chicago Wilderness Alliance Cafe, focusing on protecting landscapes for biodiversity conservation, and particularly focusing on options connected to private lands and landowners. In various ways that folks can protect the special places that they love throughout the Chicago Wilderness region. My name is Brandon Hayes. I'm with Bold Bison Communications and Consulting, and I'm helping to host and move the session forward today. I am joined by my colleague, Natalie Citro, who you see here in the room, and also Laura Riley, who coordinates Chicago Wilderness Alliance. If you have any technical issues throughout the session today, please feel free to reach out in the chat to Natalie or to Laura or to me, and we'll be able to help take care of that. We have a very robust session today with a lot of wonderful speakers. So we will ask before we get started that if you have questions as we're going, there will be a chance at the very end when all of the speakers have finished to be able to have a Q&A with sort of the slide deck down, the mics open, sort of folks being able to have a conversation with our speakers after the 2 o'clock hour. But before then, as we're going through the sessions, we want to make sure that we get all of the information out to folks, especially folks who have to leave at the top of the hour at 2. That you ask any questions that you might have while we're going through the session in the chat. And the speakers, after they're done, will engage with folks in the chat. Other folks can be able to answer questions. So again, we're going to keep Q&A to the chat while we're doing all of the speaker presentations. And then we're going to have a larger Q&A at the end of the session. This is one of many Chicago Wilderness Alliance cafes, and we'll talk a little bit more about the cafe series at the very end of today's session. With us today, we have a really amazing lineup talking about land conservation. We have Brook McDonald from the Conservation Foundation, Ben Habither and Patrick Chess from Kane County Forest Preserves, Amy Dahl from the Friends of Illinois Nature Preserves, Lorna Gladstone, who is a private landowner committed to protecting a very special place in McHenry County, and Rebekah Snyder from the Lake County Forest Preserves. Again, my name is Brandon, and Brooke, if you could advance the slide. I want to talk a little bit about what Chicago Wilderness is and about the Green Vision initiatives. So the Chicago Wilderness Alliance is a multi-stakeholder alliance that spreads across 4 states, from Wisconsin through Illinois and Indiana, and into Michigan. And it is focused around protecting and conserving the lands and waters and the landscapes of the Chicago region. As a fundamental core piece of this work, the Alliance has developed 7 priority initiatives, of which this one is focusing on number 4, which is protecting landscapes for biodiversity conservation. As you see there in the graphic, they are all interlinked. Managing healthy landscapes is interlinked with growing with agriculture, interlinked with prioritizing green infrastructure, obviously protecting landscapes, increasing equitable access, taking climate action, and of course, protecting healthy water. These 7 initiatives form the core of the work of Chicago Wilderness. And this cafe is part of the series introducing them all to the public. Next slide, please. Talking a little bit about this particular initiative, protecting landscapes for biodiversity conservation, we do have on the call, one of whom is speaking and one of whom is here hosting, Kathy Garrity from the Forest Preserves of Cook County, and again, Ben Habither from the Kane County Forest Preserve District, who are the co-chairs of this initiative. We're also joined on the call by Debbie Moskowitz, who is retired from the Field Museum, and she is sort of a superstar volunteer with this initiative. We invite anyone who would like to participate in protecting priority landscapes reach out to any one of those or anyone else who's been pointed out on the call today, or even just in the chat, like letting us know that you are interested in learning more about this particular initiative. But the core of this initiative is tied to the 30 by 30 challenge that is tied to the Restoring America the Beautiful, Conserving and Restoring America the Beautiful campaign, and also tied to larger United Nations goals around restoring 30% of the landscape by 2030. In the Chicago Wilderness region, that could amount to adding 270,000 acres of protected lands and waters. Obviously, we're not going to get there just with all of the wonderful public land protecting agencies throughout the region. So there's all sorts of important ways to protect land, from municipal parks, county parks, all the way up to state parks, forest preserves. We have representatives from multiple on today, but also private landowners and land trusts are going to be a key part of that puzzle. And so that's why we have an array of perspectives on how folks can think about protecting land that they love and that you love. And so now to sort of move us into sort of the first overview perspective, the perspective of land trusts and what a land trust is and how it protects land, I'm going to turn it over to Brook McDonald from the Conservation Foundation.
Hello, everyone. Can you hear me okay? Good. All right. Just give me a second here. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to start off with why preserving land is important. And if we ask people all the different reasons why it's important to preserve land, I'm sure we'd come up with a pretty healthy list. The 5 points here that I'm going to share with you are from 25 years worth of polling data that we've conducted to help pass almost 24 forest preserve referenda out in the collar counties of the Chicago Wilderness region. To us, it's all about quality of life. So when we talk about why it's important to preserve land, it's really about building healthy communities, vibrant communities, and improving our quality of life. Sort of underneath that overall theme is water. And if there's one message that resonates more than anything, it's clean water and water quality. When we talk about preserving land, it's always important for us to talk about how by protecting and restoring our landscape, our natural landscape, that helps improve our water quality. It also helps improve our air quality. And with climate change and air pollution, this is also a very powerful message. Preserves and protects wildlife habitat. Also creates opportunities for places for people to enjoy, get outside, and begin to reap the health benefits found in nature. Lots more research now around, particularly the mental health benefits of being outside in nature. So that's an important message. And we find this to be also a very strong message, regardless of your political affiliation, is that people feel very strongly that we all have a responsibility to preserve and pass something better on to future generations. So these are sort of the 5 key points that we use when we're out there talking to people about why it's important to preserve land. Conservation land trusts. My organization, the Conservation Foundation, we refer to ourselves as a conservation land trust. Conservation land trusts are 501c3 charitable organizations, not-for-profits, whose primary mission is preserving, protecting, and restoring and stewarding our natural landscapes. Conservation land trusts are in the forever business. And now that doesn't mean that the organization must be around forever, but the lands that land trusts protect must be protected in perpetuity. So regardless of what tool we use, we always want to look at the work we do as being permanent. There are more than 1,000 conservation land trusts throughout the United States, according to the Land Trust Alliance, and we have about 32 in Illinois. Most are local. Some are more regional. So local might be like the Barrington Area Conservation Trust, working mostly in the Barrington area. Another local would be maybe a county, like the Land Conservancy of McHenry County. Some are regional. My organization, we work in 7 different counties. Openlands is a great example of a regional organization working throughout the Chicago Wilderness region. And then some land trusts are statewide, like the Illinois Audubon Society, and then national, like the Nature Conservancy, who also has an Illinois state chapter. Conservation land trusts are supported by the community through donations, through memberships, and rely a lot on volunteers to help steward and take care of the lands that they protect. Some missions go beyond just preserving land and include water, watersheds, cultural or historical or archaeological sites, outdoor education, recreation, and most do some amount of community conservation or community education and engagement work. And when there's a local public agency to work with, conservation land trusts like to partner with the local open space agencies. This is our mission statement, for example. We've been around for more than 50 years. We improve the health, of our communities. That's sort of the why. And then the rest is sort of how we go to do it, by preserving and restoring land, protecting our rivers and streams, and promoting stewardship of our environment. Many conservation land trusts are accredited through the Land Trust Accreditation Commission, which verifies sound finances, ethical conduct, responsible governance, and lasting stewardship. For those organizations who are not accredited, we like to see that they have at least adopted the Land Trust Alliance's standards and practices. And of course, it's always good to be a four-star charity navigator organization. So these kind of things provide credibility to conservation land trusts and working with landowners in the community. The Prairie State Conservation Coalition is the statewide association of conservation land trusts in Illinois. Amy Dahl and I both currently serve on the board for PSCC. The mission of Prairie State is to unite and strengthen the land conservation community throughout the state of Illinois. And Prairie State is currently expanding its membership beyond just land trusts to include other public and private land conservation agencies and organizations such as forest preserve districts and other organizations who want to help strengthen land conservation in Illinois. So we often refer to our open space toolbox. I'm just going to talk about four real quickly before we pass it on over to Ben. But before I get into these, there are many tools in the toolbox. The four I'm going to talk about are the most commonly used by conservation land trusts and private land conservation, but also these are also used by public agencies as well. And also a note, there are many, many nuances to each one of these tools. So I'm just going to keep it simple and keep it high level for the purposes of moving this forward here. So the first one I'm going to talk about is fee simple acquisition. Then we'll talk about land donations, bargain sales, conservation easements, and then I'm going to let Amy talk about the Illinois Nature Preserve system. So first one, fee simple acquisition. This is real easy to understand. If you've ever bought or sold a house, that was a fee simple transaction. It's simply the transfer of ownership of the land at an agreed upon sum of money. So if you own a piece of land and you want to sell it for $1 million, and if I want to buy it and turn it into a park or a forest preserve, I give you $1 million, you get your money, I now own the land. That's a fee simple acquisition. Oftentimes these can include options or rights of first refusals, and can also be included in life estates. In terms of where the money comes from, if you're a public agency, it usually comes from referenda bonds, special taxes, grants, maybe a local cash or land cash ordinances if you're a park district. From the private side, we usually get our money, Conservation Land Trust, get our money through mostly private grants, private donors, and private donations. Next one is a land donation. I'm not going to go into this much because Ben's going to talk about it, but it's simply someone donating their land for the purposes of conservation. It can result in a substantial income tax deduction, but also be included in life estates and often done through wills. We and others I know have received a lot of free land through people's wills and bequests. Land can also be donated as part of the development scenario, donated to a municipality, donated to a conservation land trust, or could be donated to a park district or a homeowners association. This is one of my favorites, a bargain sale. A bargain sale is a part sale and a part donation. It is when the seller sells the land for less than fair market value and then claims the difference as a charitable deduction. So let's say you have a piece of property, it's worth $50,000 an acre, but you decide to sell it to me for $25,000 an acre. Who would do such a crazy thing? Well, there's a lot of really shrewd people out there, because the difference between the appraised value and the sale price can be claimed as a charitable donation, and depending on what kind of basis points you have into the property could help buffer any capital gains taxes. And in fact, we've done several of these where the seller has literally walked away with more money in their pocket by selling it for less than fair market value. But it also makes the transaction affordable. Let's say that you really want your land preserved. I can't give you the amount of money that you really want, but you agree to sell it to me for less because this is all I have. So you made it affordable to me. You still get some money. You can claim the difference as a tax deduction, and then we'll probably name the park after you. And then the last one is conservation easements. A conservation easement is a tool used not exclusively, but almost exclusively by conservation land trusts. We have 47 conservation easements, in fact, at the Conservation Foundation, but it's a tool used throughout the country by land trusts. It's a legal agreement between a landowner and a not-for-profit land conservation organization, such as a land trust, and it can also be with a public agency. And we're then referred to as the holder and the enforcer of that easement. It limits the use of land to ensure that conservation values are preserved in perpetuity. Again, there's that word perpetuity, or in the forever business. We seek permanence. It leaves the land in private ownership, although some can be placed on public lands, but mostly leaves the land in private ownership, but preserves the conservation and open space values forever. So the land can be sold, it can be passed on to different generations, but the conservation easement becomes part of the land title forever. So whoever buys that property in the future is subject to the terms of that conservation easement. So there are two kinds. One is a donation. Most people donate a conservation easement. And in doing that, that can result in a significant income tax deduction. For example, let's say you donate a conservation easement on a piece of property that's worth $1 million. And then after the easement, because you've stripped away the development rights to preserve those conservation values, that land is now worth $200,000. Well, the difference, in this case, $800,000, becomes a potential income tax deduction that the landowner can spread out over 16 years to try to maximize that deduction. The federal government has said land conservation is good. They don't have all the money in the world to buy all the land they'd like, so they provide these tax incentives for these private land conservation tools, such as conservation easements. And in the state of Illinois, a conservation easement land subject to that can be reduced up to 75% of their property taxes. But to get those tax benefits, it has to meet certain criteria. And that's where the Conservation Land Trust can help work with the landowner to help realize those tax deductions. And then the other way is to purchase a conservation easement. Let's say you can't afford to donate, or you can't realize the tax benefits, you'd rather have the cash. Instead of you donating that easement to me, I would purchase a conservation easement from you on your property, which is basically purchasing the development rights. So in the previous scenario, I would give you $800,000 because that's what the appraisal said the value of that conservation easement is. And so the value of the easement, whether it be for tax deduction purposes or for purchasing the development rights, is the difference between the value of the land without the easement and with the easement. So those are the four main tools that conservation land trusts use to help preserve land, working with private landowners throughout the entire country. So
thank you so much,
Brandon. I'm done.
Excellent. Thank you so much. That was fantastic. If you have any questions for Brooke, please feel free to add them in the chat at this point, or stay till the end of all the speakers if you wish to ask your question with your voice. Before I turn it over to Ben Habither and Patrick Chess from King County, I want to share a quick look at a tool that will help us sort of visualize the sort of array of protected land and opportunity in the Chicago Wilderness region. So what you see in front of you, that boundary, in our landscape, is the boundary of what we consider the Chicago Wilderness region. It is the boundary that the Alliance is working to protect and move conservation forward. This tool is available on the Chicago Wilderness Alliance website on the hub. And it's a very, very useful way to visualize, as you can see, high quality natural areas. You see them in yellow and in that sort of red there, and the yellow and red is sort of unprotected versus protected, and then also protected lands. So you'll see if I turn off protected lands, you see sort of how barren the region would be without all of the protected lands that we already have popping up there in green, in part because of the work of so many Chicago Wilderness members and also so many private landowners. And one of the things that you can do with this tool is zoom in and look in your neighborhood, in your part of the Chicago wilderness world, sort of where are things protected? Where are things protected by you? That might be protected by a land trust or protected in various other ways, including the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, which we'll hear about in a moment. But I have zoomed in now onto Kane County to give you sort of a broad overview of sort of land protection there. And I'm going to now stop sharing my screen and turn it over to Ben Habither and Patrick Chess.
Yeah, hi. If you can hear me okay, I'm Ben Habither. I just started my timer, Brandon, so I'm hoping to keep us on track here. I'm the executive director for the Forest Preserve District of Kane County. Pat's a little under the weather, so he's online, but I'll be doing all the talking here. And kind of, Brooks' intro was perfect. He talked about 4 tools for land acquisition. I've got 5 minutes. I'm going to tell you about 4 questions to ask yourself when you are evaluating a donation. Then we're going to look at 4 examples. And realized earlier I wore my glitchiest shirt on this Zoom call, so sorry about that, how crazy it looks. But so in 2017, the Forest Preserve District here passed a referendum for $50 million. 40 million of that went to Land Act, 10 million went to capital. We're still spending that out in 23, and we've realized almost 3,000 acres of protection. Almost all of that is fee simple, which you all know now. We did accept some donations. And typically when we have a conservation easement opportunity, we send them over to our friends at the Conservation Foundation. They keep it private, they keep that easement. Maybe someday they want to do fee simple or donation and it comes back to us. And I'll show one example of that. But first question you want to ask, if you have the opportunity to protect some donated land, we all get really excited and we're in love with most of the parcels, but you want to ask what's on it. You want to look at the current vegetation, kind of get an idea of what you're dealing with. If you were looking at a house, you'd say it has good bones. Do you have big hickories and supporting overstory in a woodland? Do you have soils to build a prairie on, or is it all degraded? Do you have a bunch of buildings on the parcel that you're going to have expensive demolition, or maybe the community is not going to be supportive of that, or maybe you have to find an adaptive reuse? And then you also have to ask about easements. There's all kinds of utility easements. Conservation easement could already exist on there. What restrictions have been placed on the land? So after you ask what's on it now, you want to ask what was on it, a process that Collins likes to call landscape genealogy. Let's take a look at what used to be there. Is it still intact? Has it been? I think there's a Wendell Berry quote. There is a Wendell Berry quote that always goes through my head, that there's no unsacred land. There's only sacred and desecrated places. But some of these donations you might be evaluating have been desecrated to such a level that you might not have the money to reverse that. So take a good look at what was on there, what you're looking at as far as the lift for restoring that and maintaining it, and do you have the funds to do it? A question we've been asking ourselves a lot in the Land Acquisition Committee, is there actually a threat? We want to protect everything, but sometimes just the situation on the ground, you've got a parcel that's not really threatened. It's kind of de facto protected because of, might be hydric soils in there that prevent development. There could be zoning rules which prevent development. It could kind of already be protected without any sort of legal protection on it, in which case, if you're prioritizing lands that you're going to take, maybe you can wait a little while on that. Finally, one I've learned a lot in the last year is, who else do I have to tell? There's a lot of land plans out there by municipalities, counties. Drainage districts was a hot one this week. If you guys are looking to take some land and flood it, you probably want to contact your drainage district before you do that, because now you're apologizing instead of just asking permission. But if you'll take a look at the slide here, we've got 3 views of the same parcel. So look at the purple guy on the left. This is a donation that came to us, about 30 acres. It was the Edwards family. And Helen was a successful physicist at Fermilab. They spent their life in Germany. They did not have any kids, and towards the end of their life, they wanted to donate everything to the Forest Preserve District. In this case, they also they donated all the land. They tore their own house down before it came to us, and they donated the contents of the house, which we were then able to auction, or going to auction for our foundation. Now, a 30-acre standalone parcel, it was already quality. It's got great oaks on it. We have a big skunk cabbage patch, and we've got this nice Stony Creek in there. But we still evaluated, do we want this little standalone parcel in the middle of a township where we don't have a lot? But the board did accept that donation. How could you not with that kind of pedigree on there? And just this last month, we were able to protect the parcel in the middle, which was a fee simple acquisition of the Neville parcel. And the same thing, we've got a lot of buildings on there that we have to evaluate. We were just talking this morning, what are we going to do with those? And so in our case, it has a very nice house on there. The board has just voted to put district staff in that housing. So kind of have to find a need for that, but now it's a placeholder. And finally, on the right, we didn't call them out here because nothing's for sure, but the recent acquisition of these two other parcels has meant neighbors in the vicinity also want to be approached for conservation. So accepting that 30-acre donation has made a domino effect in this region, which you can tell is blowing up with developments. The community really wants to see more protected open space along this Stony Creek corridor. You heard my timer. I'm going to go quick on these next three. But if we can look at the next slide, these are three standalone properties. The one on the left is just a little 2-acre parcel that came to us first from our stormwater folks over at the county. They wanted to know if we take it as a donation, and then the private person. The Forest Preserve District owns the land to the left of the yellow line. This is disjunct. It doesn't really add to that. We have a lot of neighbor concerns about our management in this area. I can tell you that's all reed canary grass and degraded. It's all hydric soils. Nothing can be built on it. We did not accept that as a donation at this time. So it just sold. We'll see if that gamble paid off. But personally, I don't think we're going to be seeing, unless somebody's putting stilts out there and building a house like they're in New Orleans, I don't think we're going to see it get destroyed. The one in the middle is a 5-acre parcel that we did accept a couple months ago. We call it the Triber Gift, also disjunct from the Burnage Forest Preserve. It's completely wooded. And I can tell you from just doing a quick chronology, those are, not pre-settlement, but that at least 125-year-old dominant oak hickory complex. It's across from a Boy Scout area. There's no buildings on it, no associated costs. Slam dunk. Yeah, we'll take a box full of oaks all day. The final one, 13 acres, that's the Holzer parcel. This was a partnership with the Conservation Foundation. So this was, again, bequeathed to the Conservation Foundation. It was contiguous with land that we already held, and so we did a fee simple purchase from them. That one had a number of terms that Mrs. Holzer wanted to make sure happened. So to my final question of who do you have to tell, you have to tell the trust that you're doing all the things that you said you were going to do when you accepted the land. So that was an important stipulation there. I could talk about this much more, but I want to be respectful of everybody's time. So I think I'm throwing it to the first and best director of the Friends of the Illinois Nature Preserves, Director Dahl.
So much competition. Thanks, Megan. Thank you very much. I'm going to talk about kind of a specific form of protection with the Illinois Nature Preserve System. So you can go ahead and go to the next slide. So I'll try to be efficient here as well. So in 1963, Illinois passed the Natural Areas Act. It created the Nature Preserve System. It was the first in the nation to provide this level of protection. And so we are actually celebrating that anniversary this weekend. If you haven't heard about that, then I'm sorry, and we should get better at telling all of you that. But between 1963 and this year, 2023, there have been 622 nature preserves and land and water reserves that have been protected, totaling 121,492 acres. So this is in Illinois. I kind of like to think of this. This is our national park here in Illinois. They just happen to be spread out all over the state, but this is the best of Illinois nature that is protected by these nature preserves and land and water reserves. And you can go ahead and go to the next slide. Basically, the law says, this quote is from the actual law, that these areas are dedicated as nature preserves are hereby declared to be put to their highest, best, and most important use for the public benefit. So the law actually says that by setting these lands aside, this is the most important thing that we can do with these lands that are protected in perpetuity. The best thing we can do with them is not to farm them, not to develop them, but to protect them forever. Next slide. So A nature preserve is basically, it's a biodiversity conservation area permanently preserved by their owners and permanently protected by state law. So nature preserves that are dedicated have a couple of things going for them, I guess I would say. They have high quality nature, and that means that they protect the remnant natural areas that we have so little of left. They are home to endangered and threatened species. They may be the remnant areas that have been unplowed and undeveloped, and they contain our highest level of biodiversity. They also have some protections through state law, so that they are permanently protected. And the next slide. So a little bit kind of high level of how it works. It's administered by the Illinois Nature Preserves Commission, and the commissioners are appointed by the governor. The Illinois Nature Preserves Commission is part of the Illinois Department of Natural Resources. They have a relationship, but the commissioners answer to the governor, not to the director of the Department of Natural Resources. But the staff are housed within the Department of Natural Resources. I think one of the beautiful things, and similar to what Ben and Brooke have talked about, there's a way to protect land that is done by landowners, whether they are public or private citizens, and we're going to hear from Lorna soon. They get to dedicate their significant natural area. They receive tax benefits, as we've talked about, but they also are dedicating it in perpetuity. And I think there was a comment in chat that means future landowners, as it gets passed on, that dedication of the nature preserve is it passes with it. We can go ahead and go to the next slide. The problem I have with the Illinois Nature Preserve system is that we have forest preserve districts and we have nature preserves. And somebody once asked me, they're like, isn't a nature preserve just like it has prairies and forest preserves have trees? And I'm like, oh, we have a naming problem here in Illinois. So nature preserves are very specifically legally protected, and they may be owned. Many of them are owned by forest preserve districts and conservation districts, but they're not the same. Just as with easements, the landowner retains ownership. Basically, this is a type of easement. The protection is permanent, and it creates an enduring system. And one of the things that I really like to point out to people when I'm talking about nature preserves and the system, and that it's dedication, it's not designation. So the state has designated, there are Illinois natural areas inventory sites. We know what the high quality natural areas are, but dedication is a choice. It's not imposed upon the landowner. It's something that is chosen by the landowner. And I think that that's a really powerful difference. Next slide. The Nature Preserves Commission also administers the land and water reserves. We kind of refer to those as nature preserves light. So they're similar to nature preserves, but they have fewer restrictions on the allowed activities within the reserve. They're limited tax benefits, and they can be registered for a finite period of time. So that's just kind of a high level overview of that. The next slide shows our system, and so this is where I think it's a powerful system and way of looking at the fact that Illinois has high quality natural areas from north to south and east to west, and they are protected in perpetuity. So we have this web of nature preserves and land and water reserves, and then the map on the right just shows you how the state is broken out into the state staff that administer the nature preserves. So I think before then I turn it back to or over to Lorna, I'm going to turn it back to Brandon to do an introduction of my friend Lorna, who's going to talk about her nature preserve.
Thank you so much, Amy. And we're very excited to have Lorna here to talk about her experience. But I want to orient us a little bit and bring us back to the map that we just talked about, and to show on the map, what a little bit of what Ben and Brooke and Amy were referring to. So when you're thinking about high quality natural areas, and you think about removing sort of protected designations, and you see ones there now that I've removed that, you see the yellow as the protected quality habitat, and then that red as unprotected quality habitat. So you see those corridors of those streams, you see those landscapes, those chunks of land that are connected to some of those high quality protected areas. And that is a way to introduce Gladstone Fen, a really beautiful place in McHenry County in Bull Valley. And I'm just going to orient us briefly on the map before I turn it over to Lorna to sort of point out where exactly it is. It is right here. There it is, protected lands, Gladstone Fen Nature Preserve. But you also see that it's connected also to areas that are high quality habitat that are designated as such. And when you take that off, you see that it's also connected. It is right adjacent to Bossier Bog, which is McHenry County Conservation District. So in addition to the special parcel that Lorna is going to talk about on her property that is preserved as part of the system, it's also connected to immediately adjacent to land protected in another way. But with that, I'm going to stop sharing the map, and I'm going to turn it over to Lorna Gladstone to talk about her very special piece of McHenry County. Oh, and you're muted, Lorna.
Start barking. Okay, so it's an honor to be here today, and the piece of property that was donated by my parents in the 70s is by many standards a smaller piece. Altogether, it's about 14 acres, and of those 14, there are 2 that are almost separated from everything else and have not been restored. But we were the first Illinois nature preserve dedicated in our area. And it was Steve Byers, whom many of you may know, first dedication that he did as a representative of the Illinois Nature Preserve Commission. In the initially, there were 6 acres that were designated that we call the core fen. It's a calcareous fen, by the way. Then after my parents' death, my brother and I dedicated another 6 acres, and by basically turning almost all the land into a restored calcareous fen, we've just are adding with the September meeting, hoping to add about another 1.5 acres. I was in college when my parents bought this piece of property, and my mother was very interested in wildflowers and had lots of books, and couldn't find anything in any of her books that showed some of the forbs that were coming up. And that led to a several-year adventure when amongst us all, we found and talked to various people who were right at the beginning of understanding these kinds of rare ecological lands, and how they were differentiated, and what the different species were called, and all these kinds of things. And Doug Tarrant, who some may know from his work with the butterfly exhibit at the Noted Art Museum in Chicago, but who's also one of the country's lead specialists in butterflies, came one day to visit. My parents had met him and said, well, if this is really a calcareous fen, which I don't think it is, it's going to have I'm forgetting the first name, the checker spot butterfly, the Baltimore checker spot butterfly. And indeed, he went out with his net and came back running with a Baltimore checker spot in the net, which he then immediately released. So that was really the beginning of everything. At that time, my parents took walks, brought people who knew what they were talking about in to do the walks. They did walks for people all the time. There wasn't a lot to see. Things were in very rough condition, except for the 6 acres. There were many junk trees, non-native trees, tons of invasive species. And it wasn't until after my parents died that I became heavily involved. And then it became a passion. And I have to say, it's been a lifelong passion and one of the 2 most important things in my entire life. And and I started learning how to work on the property in the most primitive way. I was shown what to use for the 2 basic herbicides to use. And I cleared a very small piece of land that wasn't part of the nature preserve yet, but as a lesson to learn how to really clear the 2 most invasive species on the property. And then gradually over time, from people who worked for both the IDNR and for those who worked for the Illinois Nature Preserve and other residents in the area who were gradually restoring their property. I learned more and more and more over the years, and from my neighbors, from advisors, from reading everyone and everything I could get my hands on. And now there are, or will be, I think it's a total of about 13.5 acres, somewhere in there. The last bit will be attached, and it is today in very good condition, but never good enough for us. We always want more. We had, and I'm going to bring this up just because it was unusual at the time. There was a problem. There was an above ground stream on the property, and I could tell, even with not that much experience, that there was a problem with it. It was eating. It was filled with buckthorn. The buckthorn had made the water go down and down and down to get underneath it to keep running. And as I said, either we can do something about this or this fen will be dead. I don't know if it'll be 10 years, 20 years, but it'll be dead because the water won't be available to the fen anymore. And with the help of John Nelson, who by that point was the rep for the Illinois Nature Preserves, and Brad Semmel, who's been a great deal in a great many ways with the IDNR and is so today, found a property that had had a hydrological restoration years ago. And we did it and it worked. And the fen has literally been getting better and better every single year, not solely because of the work we put into it, but because of the water restoration, which continues to have effect on virtually the entire property. So it is it's something very special. It is something that is private. When people ask if they can come and see it, I always say yes. And I, or one of the other people who has been a volunteer for a long time, walks with them to make sure they know where to walk and where not to walk, and also to help them understand what they're seeing. Our biggest problem today, and for the past few years, is that most of the land has undergone a couple of stages of restoration and now requires herbiciding. And finding volunteers who can herbicide and are willing to herbicide is not easy. So that's one of the issues that we face, but we manage every year to move it another step forward. And I don't know, I don't know, is there somebody, am I supposed to be moving the slides? Okay, just to give you some other ideas. And I tend to take my photos mostly of specifics. So there's just, I think, just this one that is a bit of panorama. And it's a joy, it's a gift. And my biggest concern in the past few years is what's going to happen when I'm gone, because I don't have any children and the grandchildren in the family are not sufficiently interested to expect them to maintain it. So Amy Dahl and I have been talking very seriously, and we think we're going to be able to work something out so that it's not just protected in perpetuity, but that it is loved and taken care of in perpetuity. Because if there's no one to take care of a fen in very high quality, it will gradually degrade. A smaller place faster, I think, than a large one. We have little land with a lot of birds flying over and surrounded by all sorts of invasives on several sides, and people have to be in there getting rid of them or they take over. So I think that there is now a good future waiting for this fen, and that it will become every year just more and more beautiful, as it deserves to be. I think I'm slightly over, so I'm stopping now.
Thank you so much, Lorna. Just wanted to share just really quickly that in sort of the high pandemic summer of 2020, had the opportunity to see the fen and interview Lorna about the fen as part of a project for the Friends of Illinois Nature Preserves. And it really is a wonderful, special place. And I think back on that as a highlight of that year. So thank you for letting me, come and see it and be on the property and hear the story.
Everyone
Lorna.
can come and see it.
Excellent.
It's partially for the joy of the people. It's just always you have to have somebody walk you. Other than that, anyone who wants to see it just has to call.
Excellent. I want to turn us now back to the map just briefly and talk and orient us here again on our map. And this time we're going to go to Lake County, to the shore of Lake Michigan, and to a story that Rebekah Snyder from the Lake County Forest Preserves is going to tell us that pulls together sort of a bunch of the different threads that we've talked about. It pulls together land trusts, it pulls together the way that we use land in different ways. It pulls together donations, and it pulls together the work that the Forest Preserves do to protect lands in our region. So now that we've sort of zoomed in on Lake County, I will go ahead and turn it over to Rebekah Snyder from the Lake County Forest Preserves.
Yeah, thanks, Brandon. I'm really happy to be here. I'm Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships for the Lake County Forest Preserves. And I was listening to Brooke talk about all the tools for land conservation at scale, and the Forest Preserves in Lake County certainly does use all of those tools that he was talking about, primarily fee simple acquisition, but also purchasing conservation easements, and to a certain extent, donations of land and easements. Grants and donations tend to be a relatively small part of our portfolio, or we use it relatively rarely. And that's in spite of the fact that we have a pretty robust public-private partnership that we've been developing over the past 15 years. Our Preservation Foundation of the Lake County Forest Preserves is a really strong partner for the public agency, but we've always thought that we here in Lake County don't want to compete with the referendum power of your forest preserves. You all know how important that is. But in recent years, we've had to get pretty creative. The last time we went for a referendum was in 2008, when we received $185 million from the voters, and about 155 of that was for land acquisition. We've been stretching that out, but we are now fully done and out of land acquisition dollars. We are expecting to go for referendum next November, so heads up on that. We're very excited about that. But lately, what we've been doing is receiving grants and donations like this one I'm going to tell you about today in about 3 more minutes. Here we are on the shore of Lake Michigan, as you can tell, just south of Fort Sheridan Forest Preserve. So the Forest Preserves has 250 acres in the dark green at the top. And you all probably know Openlands Lakeshore Preserve, owned by Openlands, Chicago. Originally, we thought this was a 77-acre parcel. It turns out after survey, it's about 71.5 acres, and that's because of the variability of the shoreline. So now it's a 71.5 acre gift from Openlands. This came about after decades of partnership with Openlands. Of course, you can imagine we've always worked with them, especially here along Lake Michigan. Just to the north of Fort Sheridan Forest Preserve is property owned by Lake Forest Open Lands Association. Prior to them owning it, it was owned by the city of Lake Forest. And then to the south with Openlands 71.5 acre parcel, we have my colleagues have been partnering to protect this, to manage this landscape effectively for quite a long time. I saw Jim Anderson on here, our previous director of natural resources, really engaged closely with all 3 landowners, really engaged closely over the years. So I would say that this donation from Openlands came about, well, in earnest over the past 6 months, but really it results from just a couple of decades of partnership. So this 71.5 acre preserve, most of it is dedicated to Illinois Nature Preserve, is my understanding. The opportunity presented itself when Openlands reached out and was seeking to transfer permanent ownership to the forest preserves. You're probably aware that Openlands is not typically in the business of owning land for any length of time. And I think it's fair to say that it's certainly fair to say they did an excellent job of providing public access and the restoration work. But that in the long term, they're not necessarily in the business of managing a preserve day in and day out. And of course, the Lake County Forest Preserve District we're open every day of the year from 6:30 a.m. to sunset, and we're very much equipped for that. So it made a lot of sense. We did get some questions from our elected board about the difficulty of managing this site, both from a public access point of view and a natural resources point of view. But I think that it's fair to say that, if not us, who really in this landscape makes more sense than the Lake County Forest Preserves. So the gift was announced in June. We are in due diligence right now, that period where you're looking at every inholding and the environmental survey that we always do, that the survey work, as I say, we discovered we lost 6 acres, but that's okay. This is a straight up gift. And very critically for the Lake County Forest Preserves, this is coming with an endowment, or a chunk of change, I should say, about 1.3 million. The number is fluctuating a little bit. And that is because Openlands restored this and maintained it through donor support. So as part of this donation of the land to the Lake County Forest Preserves, we are also accepting that funding that Openlands had been holding to care for the site, and we are putting it into a long-term land management endowment. So the last thing I'll say is that this has become increasingly important to the Lake County Forest Preserves. We are at our operating tax cap. We have been working on creative means of diversifying our revenue in many different ways for about a decade. And more and more, we are moving toward this model where we seek to endow preserves, and those endowment funds are used in a very specific way. At this site, for the 71.5 acres, that 1.3 million will be invested and held by our Preservation Foundation for the kind of long-term return that charities can achieve, but public agencies can't. And those proceeds will go directly into this site so that every year, year in and year out, we can do the invasive species retreatment, we can replant with native trees and shrubs, we can do plant monitoring, we can do prescribed burning to make sure this stays as healthy as possible. So we're not closed yet, hopefully by the end of the month, and we will open it. It's been closed to the public for safety reasons for a couple of years. We will open it as soon as possible. And that's all I have.
Thank you so much,
Oh,
Rebekah.
I forgot that. I didn't need to convince you of its importance. This will add a whole extra mile of public shoreline to Fort Sheridan Forest Preserve. We have just under a mile. So this will bring that to almost 2 miles of public shoreline, which is a pretty hot commodity, as you know. Sorry, go ahead, Brandon.
Well, and it's a significant increase to public shoreline north of Chicago in Illinois. So having it protected and stewarded by Lake County Forest Preserves is just, it's a gift to the region. So thank you. And thank you to everybody who shared your perspectives. And we are going to open it up or before we open it up to a few questions and answers, in addition to those that we've been sharing in the chat, I just want to bring us back one last time to the map of the region. And again, you see the protected lands in green, but if I turn that off and you see those sort of high quality natural areas and some of those priorities, and those red spots in the region are really high quality habitats, high quality areas that are not yet protected. So those are opportunities for protection. But then also thinking about, this Lorna's story and Gladstone Fen, and thinking about how it's connected to, a county level protected piece of habitat, and then how other parcels sort of interconnect. And that's really the challenge and the opportunity as we think about those 270,000 acres that we want to aspire to protect through the back half of this decade. And you've also heard today about sort of different ways to do that. So if you are a landowner who is thinking about the future of your land, a very special place, you can reach out to various folks, whether it's the Forest Preserves, whether it's a land trust like the Conservation Foundation, and if you have a really sort of high quality piece and it's part of that Forest Preserve designation, or potentially could be, Nature Preserve designation, to Amy's point about names, and it could potentially be eligible for designation. There's a whole other system of protection. And then you also heard from Rebekah just now how important it is to support these organizations, whether it's referenda at the government level for public land protection, or whether it is, contributing and donating and supporting land trusts and other conservation organizations throughout the region who are helping to protect the map as you see it here and to expand that map further. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and sort of open it up to any questions, either in chat, or feel free to turn your microphone on and ask any questions. And I do know that Rebekah did have to step off at 2. I know we've lost a few other people. So a few minutes of questions. The floor is open.
I have a really quick, easy question, I think. Cynthia with Prairie State Conservation Coalition. Is there a minimum size that can be protected, preserved in this way? Like, is anybody interested in 3/4 of an acre?
Well, it's location, location, location. So we put a conservation easement, Cynthia, on a piece of property along the West Branch of the DuPage River that was only 1 acre. But it connected 130 acres. So yeah, it depends is the question, is the answer.
Great, thank you.
Any other questions? While we wait for anyone else to ask a question, just want to offer huge gratitude to all of our presenters today. So a round of applause over Zoom for everybody today for presenting and coming and joining this cafe, but also for the work you do on the ground day in and day out. It's an inspiration. Jim, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I had put something in the chat. Listening to the Gladstone Fen story is really heartwarming, and great that someone has this wonderful passion. And I'm just wondering how many stories are like that in the Chicago Wilderness Alliance region. And I don't know, Amy, if you can think about that, how many privately held properties are out there that are managed by someone's passion that we could kind of talk about as a Chicago Wilderness Alliance as something that's a great story for us. So that was my only comment. Thanks.
That's a fantastic comment, Jim. And I think also, you know, the opportunity to share this and share Lorna's story. I know, Lorna, you are very generous with your time, going and speaking at Wild Things, being willing to tell your story in front of cameras and share your experience. And then also just as a reminder that this session has been recorded. And so if you do know anyone in your life who may be thinking about a donation of land or thinking about protecting their land in some sort of, you know, permanent way, this is now a tool and a resource to share out and share broadly with folks who are thinking that way.
May I
Lorna,
add that
please.
sometimes people aren't sure whether they're ready to talk to somebody who's actually with an organization. And it's people like me that you can contact, because I don't know anyone who has dedicated their property through any organization who has not been thrilled ever since they dedicated, whether it's 1 year or it's 20 years or whatever. And talking to people who have dedicated is a really good way to start without feeling like you're, you know, I don't know what, but an easy way to get a feel from someone who's done it from the donor's point of view.
That's great. I just want to add too, if I see a lot of new names in this group, and I really, really appreciate that. As a co-chair of this initiative, we've been excited about the possibility of reaching the 30 by 30 goal, you know, having 30% of our region acquired and protected by 2030. While it may not happen, I think things like this are really good to get the word out. And if anyone has any ideas of what else Chicago Wilderness can be doing to help, we would love to do it. If you think sharing this presentation more widely in more places would be beneficial, let us know that. But I think our next cafe is going to be around how to ensure that no land is lost, like more around advocacy. So to keep what we do have, because that can also be a problem too, as you can see with Belleville Prairie. But yeah, share your thoughts.
And definitely keep a lookout for that cafe when it's announced. We're thinking it'll be sometime probably in early October for that cafe. How should if folks want to engage with the initiative, Kathy and Ben, Laura, what's the best way for folks to do that who might be interested? Reaching out to Chicago Wilderness and letting folks know?
Yeah, I think actually if they want to reach out to me, and I can kind of create a partner profile for them on the Chicago Wilderness database, and then add them to the distribution list for the protecting landscapes for biodiversity protection. So.
Right.
Yeah, there's been some limited parcels where people were looking to figure out how to get them protected, and that's what we did. We talked with Laura and connected them with the appropriate agency in that region for protection.
Wonderful. Any other questions? Excellent. Thank you everyone for joining us. You see Laura's email is there in the chat to reach out. If you have not yet, go to the Chicago Wilderness website, chicagowilderness.org, where you can hear news about the Alliance and sign up to get newsletters and announcements about upcoming cafes. And we hope to see you on a cafe soon. Thank you again to all of our wonderful panelists, and have a great and cool, hopefully, afternoon.
Thank you, Brandon and Natalie, for all of your efforts.
Thank you. Good job, everyone.